You're listening to Stellar Success, Leveling Up for Medical Pros with Dr. Tudor Francu. Join us as we explore how medical professionals can achieve stellar success in all areas of life. It's time to level up.
Hello, Dr. Rosado. How are you?
I am well, sir. How are you?
Very good. I am excited to have you on the show because you are someone who is doing something very interesting.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
I'll
So
take that as a compliment. Thank you.
let's give the listeners a little bit of a story of your career. How did you start this thing, and what are you doing now?
All right. Well, my medical career started at the ripe young age of 16 as a certified nurse's aide orderly, working as a transportation orderly in a hospital, taking patients from their rooms to the X-ray department, vice versa, for their diagnostics. And so during downtime, I would shadow some of the radiologists and watch them read and interpret X-rays. And as a result, I was learning, radiological anatomy, not even knowing it at 16, 17, and 18 years of age, which I loved and enjoyed very much. Following that, I knew I wanted to be a physician from a very young age. That being said, I went ahead and decided to go to Mexico to do 1 year of pre-med, the undergraduate, and then 4 years of medical school, and then do the fifth pathway program to a university in California. Well, I liked Mexico. Mexico did not like me. I ended up with salmonella, shigella, amoebic dysentery, um, typhoid fever, pyelonephritis, and my fever was, 40, which here is 105. And there was this lady that ingratiated herself with me, and she went to the physicians at the hospital and said, I'll assume responsibility for him as soon as he's better. And they're like, no, you don't want to do that because we're waiting for his fever to break from 40 to 39 so we could put him on an airplane, take his skinny behind back to the United States so he could die there because we don't need a statistic here. And well, needless to say, I did not die. It did take me about a year to recover. It took me a while to recuperate. Nonetheless, in that year, to my advantage, I was able to speak with different people, and coaches show up when you need them, and they started asking me about considering becoming an emergency medical technician. And so I looked into it, enrolled, did the course, loved it, became an intermediate EMT, then went on to paramedic school. Worked on an ambulance for about 5, 6 years, got burnt out with the shifts that we had. And at that time, they were starting a pilot program at the same hospital I worked through my way through high school, where they were taking paramedics, respiratory therapists, and critical care nurses and training them to become heart cath lab technicians. And so I was hired, I was trained, and the rest was literally history. I was pre-med at the time, and in the midst of working and going to school, I was involved in a very severe automobile accident that rendered me partially paralyzed from the waist down, uh, because I suffered a compression fracture at my 12th thoracic vertebrae. So one of the low vertebrae in my spine was compressed, still looks like a pancake. And so once they gave me the massive doses of steroids and muscle relaxers, um, the paresthesia, the numbness and tingling remained, but the paralysis disappeared. And so the orthopedist said, "Well, another success story. You're good to go." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, I still am not feeling right. I've got this numbness and tingling. I'm only 25 years of age. What are you talking about?" Like, "No, we're done. Have a good day." And so I went to a chiropractor who I had seen before for a sports-related injury, and he retook the X-rays, but this time I was weight bearing. And then he was the one that told me that I had the compression fracture in my spine and showed it to me on X-ray. And I would say 2 to 3 weeks after that, the numbness and tingling was gone. I was getting my flexibility back. I was getting my strength back. And I was so impressed with what he did that I decided not to pursue medical school and opted to go to chiropractic school. So I went to Life College in Marietta, Georgia, graduated in 1992 with a bachelor's in clinical nutrition and a doctorate of chiropractic. Went to practice in Ohio, enjoyed Ohio very much, but I wanted a predominantly Hispanic practice, and where I was a very small town called Sterling, Ohio, in Wayne County, where the county seat is Worcester, Ohio, home of Rubbermaid, not too far from Orville for Orville Redenbacher, yes, and Smuckers and all those really cool stuff. Lots of history there. Anyway, that I was there, but I wanted a predominantly Hispanic practice. The people there were more Amish, Mennonite, and so after about a year and a half, I moved to Arizona. That's where my twin daughters were born. But prior to my twin daughters being born, I set up a chiropractic practice. Everything was going well. And then the reality set in about the limited scope of practice, particularly in the underserved, underrepresented communities, that they see you, they think you're their doctor, they forget that you came to me for an auto accident or a work-related injury. I'm not your medical doctor. I'm not your primary care doctor. I'm your chiropractor for this specific reason. And I would get, calls, or they'd come in for office visits and they'd start talking to me about a specific condition. And I'm like, look, I can't even tell you to take a Tylenol, much less anything beyond that. And so being frustrated with the limited scope of practice led me to pursue a career in medicine. So you could see medicine was my fifth or sixth career after I graduated medical school, because I realized how expensive it was in the United States. I was married, family of four. I reached out to one of my cousins who's a physician living in Spain, but this was in the mid 90s when they were talking about the United European Union. And so she's like, you don't want to come to Spain. You want to do what I did because the economy here is going to be atrocious once everything happens, and we're one of the poorest countries. So she recommended that I go to the Dominican Republic. I did. I took, went to school, graduated with honors, and then got out. And then that's where the
How
world
old were
opened
you when
up.
you did that?
I'm sorry?
How old were you when you did that?
It was 1997, so I was 35.
Wow.
Yeah, I was 35 years of age. I had a year and a half old twin daughters and was married to a third world country.
Right. So you came back to United States after that.
Came back to the United States after that, and my chiropractic alma mater was looking to set up a clinic in Costa Rica. And so, me being a medical doctor, chiropractor, and having an MBA, because I ended up getting an MBA after graduating medical school, they were looking for a clinic director to run a clinic inside a hospital where they were going to do this um, multidisciplinary integrative program where the chiropractic students from my alma mater were going to go there and rotate with the medical students, and then the medical students were going to travel to um, Atlanta, Georgia, Marietta, Georgia, and rotate there and just have this, open relationship between the two universities and the hospitals. And so I did that for about a year, year and a half, but I did clinical trials, I did research on diabetes, I did a bunch of different things. Um, got involved in community health care, county health departments, behavioral mental health centers, urgent cares, prisons, prison doctor, jail physician, and bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And then in 2014, I'm watching TV and I see a commercial for the decriminalization of medical cannabis in the state of Florida. And 4 years prior, one of my best friends who lives and practices in Arizona, he's a chiropractor, and very good friends. His son was born a week before my twin daughters, so we've always had really good friendship, good relationship. And in 2010, when it became medically legal in Arizona, he reached out to me and said, look, I've got property. I want to set up a dispensary, but I need a medical doctor to be my medical director. And I said, say less. And we started talking about it. But because at that time, my twins and his son were 14, his wife didn't feel comfortable in us moving in the direction of cannabis. And in her mind, it's like, well, we're telling our kids to abstain, and here we're going to get into marijuana. And I'm like, it's not, Joe and Don selling weed at the street corner. It's Dr. Rosado and Dr. Dearth setting up a dispensary and everything else. But, happy wife, happy life. So that ended right there. So 4 years later, John Morgan, a very well-known attorney in the state of Florida and abroad, uh, started advertising for the decriminalization of medical cannabis. And so I sent him an email, said, I'm a physician, I'm an advocate, how do I get involved? 24 hours later, I was speaking to the campaign manager who spent the first 15 minutes of the conversation talking me out of it because as a physician, you're working in a group or you have hospital privileges, and in the past they had encountered issues with doctors saying, yeah, I'm all for it, I'm all gung ho. And then they were, threatened by their partner saying, if you do this, you're going to get kicked out of the group. Or if you do this at the hospital, or the people at the hospital would say, you're going to lose your privileges. And so they would back out. And I'm like, look, don't worry about it. I'm a rebel, let's go. And so a week later, I was on the Bureau of Speakers, and that literally was the beginning of everything that has transpired over the past 11 years. Because I started advocating for it. I started debating sheriffs on the topic. I, was learning, was reading, was studying, and I just became immersed in everything related to cannabis. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot of materials out there for a physician. So I'm reading, journal articles and read different articles, and there was one book that I was able to find, but beyond that, not much. And so that kind of put a bug in my head to, maybe I should write a book down the road. Anyway, well, down the road, I've ended up writing 7 books on the topic of medical cannabis. But in 2014, the law did not pass in the state of Florida. We went back to the drawing board, and then in November of 2016, it was approved. We voted 72% a resounding yes, but we already had some product available, and I was the first in the state of Florida to recommend to a 15-year-old boy that had terminal cancer, and I was the first in the greater Central Florida area to recommend to a 35-year-old female that had a brain tumor, an inoperable brain tumor. And so that made all of the news, the local affiliates, as well as the printed media and social media, and parents started driving to my clinic, patients started coming into the office, and I partnered with marijuanadoctors.com and became their chief medical officer, and I started advertising pretty aggressively through that. And I've, ended up seeing over 4,000 patients thus far from 2016 to present, have traveled the world lecturing and training doctors, educating lay people on the use of medical cannabis, and have managed and treated people abroad as well, that patients have requested that I be given hospital privileges to treat their family members while in the hospital. Just this one Irish moms, special needs moms are a breed unto their own. They're just an amazing group of individuals, special need moms and dads, that they just give their all to make sure that their kids are getting absolute everything that they need. And so through this mom, who had a daughter that had a condition with, where she was seizing 200 to 300 times a day, she was able to get the child in a program where she was getting the medicine sent to her to Ireland from Amsterdam. But then once they got to Ireland, none of the physicians in Ireland knew what to do or how to use it. And so she went online and started searching for me and found me lecturing at an event called Canamoms. And she reached out to me through social media. We had a conversation. I said, look, I'm not licensed in Ireland. I can't practice medicine there. I can't help. I can give you pointers and ideas, but to manage your daughter, I can't do that. Well, she went to the Department of Health in the community where she was living, went to the hospital, spoke with the hospital directors, administrators, and lo and behold, she got me privileges to manage and treat her daughter, Abigail.
Wow.
And that's
So
where
let
we're at
me,
now.
yeah, this is very interesting subject of conversation, especially for this podcast, because it's not about the success you have in this field. It's about the way you open up a new field. Um, and I need to ask you here a question that you probably heard before. You said you're a rebel yourself. And the fact that people look in medicine right now, people look at this subject as a pariah. It's something that they're not used to. It's something that they don't know about that much, and they're very worried about all kinds of treatments in this field. How do you how do you make the medical field professionals to get used to this idea? It's legal, it has some benefits in treatment of different conditions, but still, medical doctors are not using it. How do you see this subject?
Well, it's an unfortunate thing that less than 10% of the medical schools in the United States speak about the endocannabinoid system. The reality that we all produce cannabis. We all have cannabinoid receptors. We produce cannabinoids. They work on those specific receptors. Uh, these are things that are there. They exist. They've been shown. They've been named, etc. What I've been doing when I first got involved in the movement, for lack of a better term, in the community where I was doing primary care. I was a primary care doctor in a very busy practice. It was half of the building was in urgent care and the other half was primary care. And so the primary care would feed to the urgent care and vice versa. So there was this constant, back and forth going on, and we were constantly running and shuffling and moving through patients. Once I decided to get involved with the medical cannabis movement and then started getting patients calling, I had to cut back on my conventional medicine, my primary care medicine, and focusing more on the cannabis side of things. And we would have these professional meetings, these dinner meetings where big, a pharmaceutical rep would take us out to dinner and someone would lecture us on a specific new medication, and we'd have dinner and we'd all talk. And already the word had gotten out. People had seen me on TV. And so a few of the doctors, mostly the hematologists, oncologists, the cancer specialists, were approaching me and asking me, what do you think about this? What do you think about the patients that we have? What are your thoughts? And so I engaged in conversation with them. And the first lecture I did was to a group of cancer specialists on October 29th of 2015. Was the first time I actually lectured on the topic. And it was a room full of cancer specialists. And immediately I started getting, hey, once you're up and running, let me know. I've got some people to send to you. So they were really receptive. These guys were. The primary care doctors, not so much. Psychiatrists, forget about it. And so we would be at these dinner meetings, and that's where the attacks came in from the psychiatrists. Oh, you're promoting addictions, you're pushing, you're making addicts, and so I would get that attack from them. And then the primary care doctors were like, "Oh, you're just doing this for the money." I'm like, "Isn't this our business? Like we're physicians, but it's a healthcare business. We still have to pay for the electric bill. We have to pay for our employees. We have to pay, our mortgage. We this is what we do for a living. The fact that we're healing and treating people, great. That's all noble. But like my first boss told me when I was a chiropractor, you have a right side and a left side. One side is your business side, the other side is your doctor side. Your right side cannot know what the left side is doing and vice versa, because if the doctor is running the business, you're giving everything away. And if the business guy is doing the running the clinic, it's all going to be bottom line and you're not going to have the heart. So you've got to separate both at the same time. And that's what, I started getting these attacks. But as the years have gone by and they've seen the patients that, their patients coming to me and then going back to them and saying, I'm no longer needing these opiates, or I'm no longer needing these antidepressants, or I'm no longer needing these anti-anxiety medicines, or these medicines that you were giving me for nausea, I don't need that anymore. And now they're more receptive, and a few have purchased my books. Many have, reached out to me and said, "Hey, I don't know what the hell you're doing, but um, I'm going to send some people your way." So, they've evolved. Psychiatrists still not so much.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting topic of discussion, which is probably bigger than the scope of this podcast. But I think, I've talked to several people regarding this subject, and I had a few guests already here on this topic. But I think you are one of them that is bringing the subject to a different level. And I think the fact that you started this so early, historically, um, it's it's bringing me to an idea that um, you know I want to ask you, when do you think this will become a specialty?
First, it needs to be federally legal. That's the first challenge, because and here's the irony of it all. Cannabis in its natural state from the ground is considered a Schedule 1 drug. For those that don't know what that means, it's defined as highly addictive and no medicinal value. And it is equated with ecstasy, MDMA, although they are doing clinical trials with MDMA for PTSD and psilocybin, which they're also utilizing for clinical trials for PTSD and treatment-resistant depression, etc. But heroin, um, um, peyote, ayahuasca, etc. But if you look at a Schedule 3 medication, which testosterone falls in there, buprenorphine, which is a medication that's used to treat opiate use disorder, there you have a medication called dronabinol and Sesame, which are synthetic versions of cannabis. They are synthetic THC, not from the plant, but yet it's a Schedule 3. Now, how could something in its natural state be a Schedule 1 federally illegal, but a synthetic version of that be a Schedule 3? And then fast forward to 2018 with the the introduction of a medication called Epidiolex, which is a CBD isolate, the non-euphoric or one of the non-euphoric phytocannabinoids, phyto meaning plant, cannabinoid meaning works on the cannabinoid receptors. So CBD, the innocuous, good phytocannabinoid, uh, is isolated and it's created into an extraction of an oil for children that suffer with Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut, which are intractable seizures, which are these children, as I mentioned earlier, that seize 200 to 300 times a day. That comes from the hemp plant because it's grown and fabricated here in the US. And the only way that could happen is through the Farm Bill 2018, where it allowed for individuals to grow hemp in the United States. Prior to that, they were bringing hemp from overseas, the Ukraine, China, where they were loaded with mercury, with heavy metals and pesticides, and it was an absolute mess. But so you've got cannabis in its natural state, Schedule 1 drug, a synthetic version, a Schedule 3 drug, and then an isolation of a cannabis plant, because hemp is the sister of the cannabis sativa plant, the daughter of cannabis sativa L, and that's a Schedule 5. So that's the irony. So until it becomes federally legal and readily available, it's not going to be available to be taught in medical schools simply because it being federally illegal, a lot of the schools are concerned that if they start to work with or teach this, it would jeopardize their federal grants for the other clinical trials and the other research that they're doing.
How long do you think it's going to take for this to be accomplished?
Right now, because I've got my fingers on the pulse of what's going on in DC, because I have some friends that are attorneys that are lobbyists and are in that arena. And there is an act, it's called the MORE Act, MORE, which stands for the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment Expungement Act. What that would do would, one, or reschedule cannabis from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 2 or 3. It would open it up for the VA clinics to be able to make it available for the veterans without threatening them that if they do use cannabis, they're going to lose their benefits, which is a lie. But the R portion, the reinvestment, is a percentage of the taxes that are going to be, the taxation that's going to come of that, a percentage of that is going to be reintroduced into communities that have been hit by cannabis, particularly the underserved, underrepresented, brown and black communities. So percentage is going to go there to reinvest into that community. And then the E, expungement, expunge the records of anyone that has been arrested for cannabis, which would then open them up to, being able to work, being, able to provide for their families, be able to vote, etc. Gives them their full privileges as a citizen of this country.
Very interesting.
And so that's
It's got,
past, certain parts, and it's at the cusp. I'm
yeah.
thinking maybe mid next year, because next year you got the midterm elections, and from a strategic political point of view, as the president, if I were the president, that's when I would sign that MORE Act and then make everything red come November. If I were a Republican president in this day and age with this act so
Yeah.
close to something happening with it.
Interesting. I want to go back a little bit to your own mindset in this whole field, because as I said, I think you're a very good pioneer in this specialty.
Thank you.
What made you do this?
I learned about cannabis. I'm a unicorn. I learned about cannabis in medical school in the Dominican Republic in a pharmacology class. We were talking about it was one of the toxicology lectures, and we were talking about drugs, illicit, illegal drugs. And so, as per usual, the gateway drug, we started talking about cannabis. We could have started talking about alcohol, but no. We could have talked about nicotine and tobacco, but no. We started with cannabis. Those two are far more gateway drugs than cannabis ever will be, because the majority of the people that I've worked with that dealt with addiction, they drank alcohol and smoked cigarettes way before they smoked their first joint. So, that's the reality.
Isn't that funny how this works, right? In
Yeah.
society, I mean, we have alcohol in stores, we have cigarettes in stores, we have, sugar for that matter in stores, and we put cannabis aside because we just don't like it.
Yeah. And so So we started with that, the gateway drug, and they talked about the endocannabinoid system. They talked about the endocannabinoid receptors. This was in like 1999. Well, but then, of course, right afterwards, they went into but it's a gateway drug and you're going to end up doing something stronger and harder and blah, blah, blah. Well, again, being the rebel that I am, that evening I went home and I pulled up my textbook, which is the Pharmacology Bible, Goodman and Gilman, and I went to Cannabis Sativa. And when I started reading, something interesting that stood out was that I read it was not physiological, it didn't cause physiological dependence, it caused psychological dependence. And I thought, okay, that's interesting because all these other drugs lead to a physiological dependence, alcohol, cocaine, heroin, etc. Whereas cannabis is not. And I'm like, okay, but I'm in the Dominican Republic, illegal. It's 1999, 3 years post the decriminalization of medical cannabis in California, because 1996 was the first state for there to be decriminalization. So everything was still relatively new. And so I just put it in the back, of my mind as another tool in my toolbox. And I read some articles and I went to the library and I pulled out some, reviews and read some things. So I did have a basic understanding, but not a whole lot. And then it wasn't until 2010 when my friend, Don reached out to me, that's when the energy really sparked. And then 2014, once I saw the commercial, I'm like, that's it. This is a no-brainer. And that's when I went into it. And using that, that Tony Robbins mentality of, being immersed into something. And that's for literally from 2014 through 2016, everything I read, everything I did was in and around learning about the endocannabinoid system and medical cannabis.
Yeah. Um, do you think this is basically going to become a state issue for each state to adopt something like this?
Well, that's how it has been since 1996. Right now, there's 40 states that have a medical cannabis program in some capacity. But each state, it varies. Like I tell when I lecture overseas and abroad, I'll tell them about the laws in California, the laws in Florida, the laws here, the laws there. And they're like, well, wait a minute, aren't you the United States? And I said, yes, we are the United States in theory, but in reality, it's like we're 50 different countries
Yeah.
because the rules and regulations vary from state to state. I've lectured in North Dakota and I was asked a question about having a firearm and a medical cannabis card. And I said, well, I know in Florida we can do it. And I said, but I know in North Dakota you can't. And they're like, yeah, exactly. You either have a medical cannabis card or you have a firearm. In the state of Florida, you can have a firearm with a concealed weapons permit and your medical cannabis card, and you're fine. And so that's this strangeness of this. So yeah, it is a state by state situation. And the example I use a lot when I'm lecturing and being interviewed is back when Barack Obama was president. Prior to his presidency, same-sex marriages were illegal federally. They were legal in certain states, but not federally. And then during his presidency, he said it's legal across the board. And then it became legal in all 50 states and US territories. Whether the states accepted it or not, it did not matter because it was now federally legal. So it's somewhat the same with the medical cannabis. It's a state by state decision. It is legal in that state. The moment you drive out of the state with your medicine, you are now violating federal law and you are considered a drug trafficker.
Very interesting. I know.
But you can
So
carry your oxycodone and acetaminophen
yeah,
in your wallet, in your
exactly.
in your purse or man purse.
So tell me a little bit about the business currently that you're running. How does it work? What's the model of business and what do you want to do with it?
Well, the name of the company is International Medical Consultants. And so what it has been doing has been the platform for my lectures. So lecturing, education, the books that I've written, the articles that I've published falls in and around that. So advocating for the use of medical cannabis in states and or countries where it's not legal. I've spoken in Malaysia on the topic. I've spoken in Fiji about the topic. I went to Thailand and spoke about it before it was voted to be decriminalized there. I've spoken about it in Tokyo, Japan, Rome, Italy, Mexico before anything happened, and there's still nothing going on there. I've spoken Costa Rica before any laws were available in Costa Rica. So I've taken the grassroots movement and gone to places where there have been no laws and have spoken with politicians, with physicians, and with lay people, and then with advocates. And then each one is a completely different conversation. But at the end of the day, the goal is to have everybody be on the same page. And so that's what the company does, is it does education on medical cannabis.
Yeah, obviously, this is going to be a long time effort to move the needle a little bit, at least here in the United States. It's still a very controversial topic, and I think the success in this field depends on people like you. So, what's the goal for next year? What do you have in mind? What do you want to accomplish? Um, what's your biggest goal for this?
Well, funny you should ask. Over the past year, from November of 2024 to present, I did a lecture at the Indigenous Cannabis Industry Association meeting, November of 2024. Since then, I have been invited to speak at about a handful of tribes in and around the northern portion of the United States. So Wisconsin, North Dakota, Montana, Wisconsin, there's no laws. There's nothing there. So I've been invited to Wisconsin twice on two separate occasions to speak to two different tribes, but have also done a virtual meeting with another tribe. So three separate tribes just in Wisconsin, in Montana, one, in North Dakota, two, because they have sovereignty. And as of right now, there are nine tribes that, in nine separate states, that have dispensaries in their or on their reservation. So similar to the gaming side of things, that a few are now moving and transitioning into the cannabis space. And there are nine tribes, nine different states. One state, which is really interesting, is North Carolina. North Carolina is not a medical cannabis state. There is no medical cannabis. There's certainly no adult use, but the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians have a dispensary on their reservation. And so the goal over the next year, as I get more involved in being a board member for the Indigenous Cannabis Industry Association, is taking this message to the tribes, taking this message to the Native Americans. Why? Number one, the high level of addiction that exists in those communities. Two, the high level of suicides that occur in those communities, the high level of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, alcoholism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when the statistics show us that in a state where there is a medical cannabis program, it's decreased the deaths by opiate overdoses by as much as 25%, and take that to a community where the population is much less, a lot denser, that's the goal for the next year.
Yeah, that's a great goal to have actually, and now that you mentioned, I think those types of population are the most disadvantaged in terms of education and penetration of materials and lectures and people like you to kind of make a difference. Um, how can people reach out to you to learn more about this? Because I'm
Sure.
sure there are a bunch of like practices out there that might benefit from at least the educational part of it, if not the business side of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The easiest way is through my website, which is josephrosadomd.com. That's josephrosadomd.com. Um, a disclaimer, um, I the people that were handling my website and social media were let go. And so now it's a hodgepodge. So I've got two websites kind of merging together, but eventually we're going to separate them all out. I just had to do a lot of cleaning up and addressing things. So from a business point of view, always make sure you know what everybody's doing, even though you may not understand it, at least know something, because I trust it blindly, and it was a mess. So I'm now cleaning it all up. But that would be the easiest way for anyone to get a hold of me. I'm also on all the social media platforms. Again, just my name, Joseph Rosado, MD, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc.
Very nice. Joseph, I'm going to ask you one question that I almost ask everyone. With the experience that you have right now and the knowledge and the kind of breadth of experience that you accomplished so far in this field, if you would look back to yourself, younger version of yourself, what kind of advice would you give?
Um, we're doing therapy now, huh?
Pretty much.
Wow. Stick it out. Stick it out. There's going to be a lot of naysayers. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to get in your way and not be supportive.
Hmm.
Don't
Keep
worry about
going.
that. Just keep going. Stick
Yeah.
it out.
Yeah. I think it's one of the traits of successful people, to not quit, regardless of the noise out there, you know? Um, but I wish you keep going too, because you're, we need people like you. We need people like you to kind of open up new roads, new visions, and probably um, a new specialty, hopefully.
Your mouth to God's ears.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate your time.
I appreciate yours. Thank you, sir.
Are you a busy medical professional striving to excel in life and work? Stellar Success Podcast brings you the habits and insights of top leaders in medicine and beyond. Discover strategies for balance, growth, and fulfillment in every episode. Follow us on Instagram at Stellar Success Podcast for daily inspiration. Start your journey to success today. Subscribe to the YouTube channel now.
That's a wrap on Stellar Success, Leveling Up for Medical Pros with Dr. Tudor Francu. Interested in joining us? Go to stellarsuccesspodcast.com/guest to apply. Stay stellar and level up.